In 2018, I completely burned out of my engineering career in tech and decided to take a year off. Since then, I've been very fortunate to 4x my income and find a career that I very much enjoy. But I know there's a lot of people out there that are considering quitting a job, considering leaving a job that they haven't had any interest in over the last 6, 12 months, etc., that are on the fence about actually making that change. So I want to walk through what ultimately led me to quit and how it has turned out and why I think it was one of the better things that I have decided to do thus far in my career. To make a very long story short, when I graduated college, I was a student athlete in the sport of team handball for Team USA. And I was balancing that on top of a full-time engineering schooling workload. And also when I graduated, I quickly realized that I wanted to keep playing because when you're playing for a national team, there's no collegiate eligibility where once I graduate, I can't play, etc. So I very quickly decided when I started working to continue to train for team handball on my own and then travel on nights, weekends, vacations to different places where I could play tournaments, etc. So I was doing this largely for almost 7 years and just reached the point where I completely burn out, like physically and emotionally. One, I did not enjoy engineering as a whole. I quickly discovered that the insane passion that I had for sport, for team handball, was something that a lot of my peers in engineering had for engineering. And that just wasn't like a part of my DNA. I wasn't someone who wanted to tinker with a bunch of stuff in the workplace and then go home and start a side project and build a mobile app on the side or build all these different things. And more power to the engineers that are doing that. But also too, this was in the height of hustle culture. So like 2015, 2016 timeframe, that's when like all the Gary V's of the world, no disrespect, are like putting content out all the time. That's when he's blowing up as a brand. All these motivational videos are coming out on YouTube for the first time. Every one of my coworkers has, 4 different side hustles. They're a part of 3 startups. They're a co-founder of 2 different companies and all of these different things, right? It was a hyper-competitive environment that I think as a whole, the world is starting to kind of pull back from just a little bit here in 2022. Really what happened at the time is while I didn't enjoy my job, I compartmentalized it enough because I needed to pay off my student loans and I needed to save up money so I could play team handball around the world. So I really just sucked it up for about 2 to 3 years and worked as an engineer 9 to 5 and then played handball and used everything I made from that job to basically play team handball around the world. But it really became problematic at the end of my second year. I decided to leave the large tech company that I was at. I really didn't like large corporate environments. And at the time, I pawned that off as the thing that was the most annoying to me. So I go to a small engineering startup and I realized by the end of the first day that I had probably made a mistake and that engineering was the problem, not a big company versus a small company, etc. And on top of that, being at a startup, that was even more of a hustle culture. I was working 60 to 80 hour weeks, and at the extreme end of it, when I had international tournaments that I had to play, the company was 2 hours away from our training headquarters. And so the week before an international training camp, I would go into my office at 6 a.m., I would leave at 2 p.m., I would drive 2 hours to practice and practice with the team, drive back 2 hours to Atlanta where the company was at the time, and do that the entire week. Friday, I would leave the office at 2 p.m. after going in at 6 a.m. and I would fly to, as an example, Germany and play a 7-day, 2-a-day training camp where we had practice in the morning and we played a German club in the evening. And it was insane. But at the same time, like I didn't even have time to stop and think about how destructive it was to my emotional and physical makeup. But over time, I became very dejected at work. I just didn't even care. Like, I was doing something that wasn't even contributing to the long-term goals I had for myself. And while I could tolerate it for a while, it just got to the point where it was so demotivating to do something that I knew wasn't the long-term fit for my career that I had to make a change. So all that to say, ultimately in 2018, after working 80-hour weeks for basically a year and playing sports internationally on top of that, I decided to quit my job and take a year off. I just reached the point where I didn't care anymore. Like, I didn't have a ton of money, but I had saved and lived frugally to give myself at least a little bit of a runway to play overseas. It required that I move back with my family when I was in the States, so I didn't have to pay for rent, all these different things. But ultimately, I just reached the point where I didn't care. Like, I really didn't care about my job anymore, and I knew I needed to make a drastic change and just didn't have anywhere else to go, so I had to pull myself out of that situation. So at that point, what ultimately happened is over the next year, I would hop around and play at different places overseas in the sport of team handball. But I also still, it took me like 3 to 6 months to really just kind of relax and not feel the need to do something all the time. That being said, I did start a few different online brands to see if I could just make anything happen on my own. I didn't have really any huge success, but I learned a ton and just really got to the point where I started creating things because I found them interesting. And that was a process that took maybe 3 to 6 months to really just decompress and realize I didn't have to force anything, I didn't have to work all the time. And then once I kind of got that out of the way, I really started to be able to ask myself questions of like, what do I actually want to do? What looks cool to me? And I started a small e-commerce store as an example in specialty coffee. That's a hobby that I still have to this day, but it was something where I approached it with the attitude of like, hey, I drink coffee, I like coffee, I want to learn about an e-commerce store. Let me make an online store and see what happens. And ultimately, it didn't really go anywhere all that much, but a very cool experience right before I re-entered the workforce. I started selling at pop-up events around the holidays, around Thanksgiving, around Christmas. I partnered with local breweries and sold specialty coffee from the area. And it was just a ton of fun. Like I made a little bit of money. Yeah, it was cool. It was a very awesome experience, but I just started doing things because I enjoyed them more than anything. And that was a shift that I think was very beneficial. Having gone through that burnout phase, having realized that engineering was not the be-all end-all of my career, I just needed to get back to a place where I was just trying and doing things simply because they looked interesting, simply because I enjoyed them. Like as an example, part of the reason I make videos on this channel is because when I kind of burned out of engineering, I had a network of former engineers, whether I went to school with them, whether they were former coworkers of mine, that had transitioned to tech sales. So I was able to reach out to them, better understand what their life was like in tech sales, and ultimately got a referral for my first job and did very well because of that. But I'd say a few things on taking a year off if you're considering doing something similar, which is it was very beneficial for me to fully decompress. Take away the obligation, clear away the things that I enjoyed, the things that I didn't enjoy, and really get back to a place where I could ask myself, what do I find interesting and what do I want to do? And ultimately, the more, as an example, in a professional context that I found out about tech sales, it seemed like it really aligned well with my competitive personality, with the technical background that I had, but also outside of work, and something I still do to this day, is start side projects that I also find interesting as well. Like as an example, making content here. I also run a very small specialty coffee business. I've taught myself how to roast, how to pull high quality espresso, and I have basically a cafe in my apartment. It's something that I very much enjoy, and I bring people over, host them, give them great coffee. It's something that I just do because I enjoy it. And I think that a lot of times if you're in a job that you don't enjoy, or you're in a very intense job, maybe you're working 10, 12, 14-hour days repeatedly, you candidly don't have the time to just take a step back and really genuinely ask yourself, what do I find interesting? What do I want to do? You don't have the mental clarity or time to even pursue that in the first place. Even though the specific stores that I started online, the specific brands I tried to start, didn't necessarily give me the experience that an employer wanted to see to say, hey, this is the best fit, just starting something completely from scratch and starting to make a lot of progress, get people to buy my products online, even though it was, again, a very, very small amount. Like, it was very rewarding to have no idea of what that was, no experience whatsoever, make something completely from scratch, and actually have a small bit of success. That confidence that I gained from making something from nothing, having no experience, and making something that people actually cared about, at least a little bit, gave me a lot of confidence when I was in my interviews, when I came back to the workforce and told people my story of why I took a year off, and made them much more willing to take a chance on me because they saw, one, yeah, maybe I had a reason to be burnout and not really enjoy what I was doing. But two, I also took some time off. I made the most of it by one, decompressing, but two, doing things that were important to me. Yes, I had a unique experience of playing sports around the world, but I also took a chance to start an online store and made a little bit. I mean, we're not even talking like tens of thousands of dollars, but I made a little bit of money and could walk people through that thought process of how I built something from scratch. And since then, I think coming from that place of authenticity, coming from that place of just wanting to do things that I thoroughly enjoy, I very much enjoy my job in tech sales now. And I've been very fortunate to have it pay off in a very meaningful way. In a year and 11 months, just under 2 years, I got promoted 3 different times and ultimately quadrupled my income from what I was making as an engineer. So I've been very fortunate to be in this position. And at the same time, I don't know that if I didn't take that year off and I just transitioned to tech sales just because I hated my engineering job, I don't know that I would have had as much success. I go out of my way now to create very clear boundaries where, again, there are times where I'm working 50, 60, 70-hour weeks as it's required. I mean, that's just part of sales and that's okay. But there are times now where I think in 2015, 2016, when I just graduated college, when hustle culture is super prevalent, when I'm in this big tech company with tons of very, very smart people all around me all the time, in the office, I might add, I felt very compelled to just keep working and I would find things to do. Whereas now in my career, I set very clear boundaries where I'm willing to drop what I'm doing and work at any given time on high priority things. But also if I put in a solid day of work and it's time for me to decompress, it's time for me to exercise, I set those boundaries and make them very clear. I can hop on and take care of things if I need to, but I'm also not going out of my way to just work to look busy. I'm really focused on meaningful things, and I think that has paid a ton of rewards to my career as a whole, because one, I'm very focused on doing things that I enjoy. I come from a very authentic place in a profession that definitely requires that in tech sales. But two, I'm much healthier from a mental, from a physical perspective. I'm still exercising, maybe not quite at the level I was when I was training as an athlete, but I'm making very clear boundaries and have seen enough at this point in my career to really understand what are things that are very important to my job, to my business, to my coworkers, to my team, and what are things that are just busy work that actually aren't moving the needle. And when I set those boundaries and make them very clear, when I articulate my thought process and can explain to my coworkers, to my managers, etc., that what I'm doing right now is not productive and here's why I think so, I'm having very open, honest, and authentic communications with my entire team, and I'm building myself as a trustworthy asset around me. And again, all coming back to that place of authenticity. So I hope this video maybe gives you a little perspective if you're in a similar situation. Again, there's no right answer, but I would tell you if you're taking time off and you don't have a fantasy that your life's just gonna be immediately better, that's great. That's actually where you wanna be, where maybe you just take some time off, take a month or two with no agenda whatsoever. As you begin, maybe over the later part of that break, look into things that you just want to try and learn. As you remove all the distractions, all the things that you don't want to do, like your day job, etc., ask yourself, what are things I would do if money was not the sole focus? Because I think a lot of times we get into high potential earning careers that require a lot of us physically, mentally, and we forget how far we've strayed from just being organically open to new experiences, to trying things that really catch our interest and attention. And as you do those things, document them, maybe try and experiment with very, very small business. It doesn't need to be this next amazing business idea. As you look for the next move in your career, you can network with different people. Maybe you're trying to start a small business, you meet different people from totally different backgrounds that just add to your perspective, and you begin to really reconnect with your very authentic self and the authentic things that you want to do over time. So anyway, I could talk about this for an hour and a half or more. If you have any questions, feel free to comment below, but I hope that helps if you're in a similar situation. It has worked out very well for me, and I think it's something, again, if you're in a situation financially, you've worked hard to really live responsibly and save to take a year off, I would recommend you do it if you're completely dejected from your work and don't enjoy it at all. But appreciate everyone's time, and we will see you next week.